and the moderator is Mr. Asif Faruqi. The session Tanzo Maza is going to be held in room Aquarius, that's upstairs. And I would request you all to please kindly turn off your cell phones. There will be a question and answer session at the end. Thank you.
Thank you for the announcement. So all people interested in Tanzo Maza and all the dead set people who are not interested in satire and humor, they are welcome to stay on. Actually, by mistake, I had gone into the other room and I was a bit overwhelmed by all the people I thought had turned up to hear about translations. And now I know it's a mistake. Interestingly, one of our panelists may have also gone to hear about humor and poetry. Anyway, I'm going to begin now because it's late and we have to finish in time. She's on her way. Well, I've had a number of people confirm that she's here, including myself. But I think I'm going to start right now because if you don't, anyway, this is going to be a session on the actual doing and publishing of translations from one language into the other. And I am very happy to have the two panelists here, but also with a few somewhat less number of people than you've seen in the other sessions, but I'm very thrilled to have distinguished translators such as Durdana Sumro and Mehrab Shah Faruqi, who are sitting in the audience and having uttered those magic names. Femida Riaz is here. Femida, can you walk up on the stage? I thought you had gone to hear Tanzo Maza. Right. We are going to begin, and how I would like this session to flow is that I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves rather than my introducing it. So I'm going to ask them, and maybe this is the question I have framed, is I will ask each one of them to mention the work they have done, their interest in translation, some of the work they have published briefly, and then I will move on to probably more elaborate questions. So brief introductions, and Sylvia, I think I'll begin with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for introduction. So I'm Silvia Di Natale. I was born in Italy, but as a young girl I went to Germany to live, and I'm still living there. So that was a language I wrote my first books, academic books anyway. But at the age of or more at 40, I thought it was a pity, so I was going to forget my own language. So I began to write in my own language, and so I wrote my first novel 10 years ago, and then the following 8 novels too. The last one has to be published in the next autumn. So I had some experience with my first novel and a couple of stories which were translated into English or more languages. And I was also a translator from German to my own language. So that's my experience.
Thank you, Sylvia. Lorenza, may I ask you to introduce yourself?
My name is Lorenza. I live in Italy, but I was born in South Africa. So I was confronted with the issue of translation right from my beginning. I had a nanny who spoke Ndebele. I went to school speaking English. I had my parents speaking Italian. So translation is a theme that runs through. Translation is a theme that runs through my life. I have an English husband and English-speaking children whom I oblige to translate whatever they want to say to me in Italian. I am here because of a translation. The book I wrote about Eddie Abdul Sattar has been translated into English, and that is something that is relevant to this discussion. In terms of background, I am a linguist, and therefore, once again, it's an interest in the subtleties of transferring a thought from one language to the other. In my work after university, I dealt very much with the issues of minority and majority language, which is an issue that I've seen has been discussed at length in these days here at the festival, you are grappling too with the debate on what is your national language, what to do with the minority languages. This is a theme that in Italy is extremely important and on which there is a lot of not only of linguistic and sociological work, but also of political work around it. The national language is an important issue. It has been an important issue for us since our recent unification. We are a very young country, but at the same time we've been grappling with the issue of how to maintain our local, regional knowledge and traditions.
So I guess the question is as relevant as it is to Pakistan. Femida,
Absolutely.
can you tell me, you introduce your experience as a translator?
Yes, sure. My name is Femida Riaz. I was born in Meerut, India, and but have lived in Sindh, Pakistan, all my life. Right. And I have done quite a bit of translations from different languages, and they have been published here by somebody. And I'm coming from Delhi, India, actually, which gives me a chance to introduce this book, which is again a translation. This is by Vibhuti Narayan Rai, and the name of this was written in Hindi, right? So what I feel is that today, like the question of national language is equally important in our country. It has been equally important, but at the same time, the cause of a lot of tension between the Muslims and the Hindus in India prior to partition was Urdu and Hindi. These two languages were basically, they became the cause why these two, it became one of the important points on the agenda of making Pakistan. Okay.
Okay, Femida, thanks.
Yes.
I had hoped you'd introduce your work as a translator, but maybe the issues we can come back when we have more broad questions.
As a translator, I have translated from Persian, which I knew. I have translated modern Persian woman poet Farrukhzad, and later Rumi. And after that, I've translated the works of Sheikh Saadi. And now I'm working on a translation of Attar into English. So, and then I've also translated from Sindhi. And I think it's a very important bridge that one can build between two communities who could be contending. See, these are really, translations are really bridges. I have translated from Sindhi, from the works of Sheikh Ayaz, and also the work of Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai, which gives the other community the chance to understand other people, their feelings, their thinking, and I think that therefore this becomes a very, very important thing. Also, because I feel that publishing translation is extremely important. It brings in fresh blood into a language. It brings in new ideas. It brings in even languages expand because of translation. Because you see, when one begins to absorb a lot of words from there's a host language and then there's a guest language. So from the guest language, one begins to absorb a lot of words. So translations have been extremely important and they should be published. I think translations have played an extremely important role in civilization, in the development of civilization. Few people think we don't think of religious texts as literature, but really it was the translation from Pali into Chinese that actually spread Buddhism all over China, because Buddha never went there. So in the building of civilization, this translation and publishing translation, now that we have this modern publishing system, so it is really something that should be valued, and the more we do it today, in today's world where there's so much strife, there is so much more need for translations of literature and non-fiction and poetry. Thank you.
Thanks, Femida. So you've really introduced the subject also. I had originally planned something else, but I'm going to ask Lorenza now because she's going to elaborate on this, and she's also going to speak about how she looks at this issue vis-a-vis her own experience as a translator.
I think I'd like to pick up
Exactly,
Tefmina's thread that she has left about translation as a tool for knowing each other, for a tool for expressing curiosity for the other. Translation is the oldest tool man has, and if we think of one of the most ancient myths of the Tower of Babel, we can look at it in a positive way, not as a moment of dispersion and division within humanity, but a moment in which diversity emerges. And from the diversity, the need and the wish to get to know the other, to find a tool to communicate with those who are different from us, who have different traditions. That being said, I would like to speak a little bit of our own Mediterranean tradition, in which our old Greek and Latin classics were translated. The oldest text known in the European culture, the Odyssey, which is 5,000 years old, was translated by the Latins in the 1st century before Christ. And the Latins translated Greek texts, and if we look back at our ancient history, there was a movement within the Mediterranean of trying to get to know each other. And the same happened in the famous school of Toledo in the 12th century, 1200, when Greek, Arab, Latin texts were all translated and all translated from each other. And the tradition of the Arabs that has brought us back so many lost texts from the Greeks. It was a world in which languages exchanged the profound roots of our reciprocal cultures. Nowadays, if we look at what is happening in our global culture, I feel a bit scared. I looked at, if you look at the UNESCO database, there is a wonderful site called Index Translationum, which gives us information of all the books that have been translated in the whole globe from 1979 onwards. And if we look at this data, we discovered that we are no longer in the Mediterranean, where Greeks and Latins and Arabs were exchanging texts and keeping culture alive. We are in fact in a context in which most of the books published are published in English. And our own small minority languages, I say this because I belong to a minority language, and therefore I feel I can say it, have very little space. It looks as if there is much less curiosity for each other than there was in the past. Or at least it feels as if all this curiosity has to go through English. I mean, just to give you an idea, from 1979 to 2012, 1,245,000 books have been published in English. Compared to this, 220,000 in French. To go back to my language, 67,000. 67,000 and 1 million in English. In Arab, books published in Arab have been 12,000. The 50th most published language is Georgian, with 1,212, and I don't think I can tell you where Urdu is. So I think this should get us thinking about our cultures and about a inevitable hegemony of the English-speaking language. In our own culture as well, in Italy, of the total of the books published, we translate about 25% from English. The most translated languages in the globe and the world are English, French, and German. So somehow we are looking at a sort of monopolization of languages. That being said, I don't know whether it would be interesting for you to know anything about the translation of my book. It was it was a wonderful experience because the communication with the translator was constant. We both knew each other's language quite competently. I won't say that I am competent in spoken English, but I'm quite competent in written English. So we were on an equal footing. We shared not only the language, I tried to share with her the history that was being translated, I showed her all the pictures I had, and so every word that she was trying to describe, she also had images to refer back to. This process of the negotiation with the translator this process of the negotiation is the essence of translation. It's a lengthy negotiation with the translator, with the editor, with the context itself. With the translator, it's a negotiation that happens on a sort of syntactical, lexical level, on the level of understanding the context. With the editor, it's a negotiation that happens on the level of the house style and of the necessity to adapt the text to the local context. The book I wrote was a book published for a European audience. Many details like girls wearing shalwar kameez or wearing a dupatta easily or people drinking chai are details that to a Pakistani Urdu-speaking public are sort of quite indifferent. I mean, you have this around you all your time, every day. But they sound so much different to an Italian-speaking audience, and they had to be explained bit by bit, because in Italy nobody would know what a chai is, nor a dupatta, nor many other details. Some things had to be changed in order to be politically correct. Some things that can be said in Italy might be offending, so one has to adapt. And but what I would like to stress is that it is essential for the writer to be able to give complete freedom. No, it's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that it is important to trust the translator, but also to be able to have continuous communication with the translator. I am very curious to know what it feels like to be translated in a language one doesn't know. To me, it would feel like being, I don't know, offering one's child to an unknown nanny. How can I really be sure that I can trust her to say what I actually wanted to say?
Very interesting. I think two major points emerge. First is that the English becoming more and more the language of global hegemony, and how translators can somehow break those barriers or break those walls and create more openings. That's one thing. And then from the more general, you move to the particular, and you talked about your experience of being translated and how it feels like. And I would like to ask Sylvia also, who has undergone this process, your new book Kurai, which was also talked about yesterday, and I believe that you have written about the process of how it feels to be translated, and is it as strange and peculiar as you have just heard it described? And maybe you can share some of the text or your experiences with us.
Yes, I will give you the point of view of an author to be translated. That's what I called the mystery of translation. Observed from outside, Translations must be something mysterious, and they are indeed. Think all about the task of translating from Japanese or Asiatic or Arabic. Sometimes, by reading a text by an author from an exotic country, I wonder if he really wrote what I'm reading. How should I know? Translations are acts of infinite trust. Even more so, they are proof of the eternal belief of mankind managing to understand each other someday. Translations are always a step towards this utopia. If translation is possible, maybe universal understanding is possible too. This is the background, but how does everyday life look? I will first address some questions that people often ask me. First, how does a book manage to get translated? Readers think I am the person who decides about the foreign rights of my books. But it isn't true. I have no power in this matter. I have sold my rights to my publishing house, hoping they will do their best to sell my work to foreign publishers. Or my agent will do that. But even their efforts can do little. Here too, how could it be different? Is the market, in this case the book market, which influences, if not determines, the strategies of the publishing houses. Isn't it strange that we are still thinking of the literary criteria of a book? Sometimes both market and literature come together, seldom happy marriages. Sometimes countries' cultural institutions also intervene to help particularly worthy books, helping with monetary grants for the translations. My novel, Kurai, took advantage of this when it was translated into Dutch. The second frequent question is, do you translate your own book by yourself if you know a language well? In my case, since I'm living in Germany, did I translate Kurai by myself? The answer is no, never, independent from your skill in the second language. To translate a book means first being true to the text. You don't have to write it again. But I couldn't translate my own books without changing them, and this would break with the first golden rule of any translation. A text that is to be translated must be considered finished, completed, perfect, even if limited. You, the translator, cannot change it, not even in order to enhance it. Later, I'll get to the problem of the correction of passages which contain mistakes. If I translated my own text, I would change it, transforming it into a different one. It wouldn't be a translation. And now we come to the happy moment when your book's rights have been bought by a foreign publishing house. The foreign editor will communicate to you the name of your translator, and he or she will soon become a very important person for you. Supposing he is an accurate translator, he will know your text maybe better than you do, and will find in your text things you never saw. It's no joke. Going through your work so many times, you will in the end no longer see the most blatant mistakes, even the macroscopic ones, as you have with your written work a similar relation as to a close, loved, and sometimes hated relative. You know him so well, and you are so used to him and to all his faults that you do not even notice them anymore. But the translator will. He will put his finger on those unseen flaws. He will notice the inconsistency of a logical sequence. To unmask a contradiction, to shine a light on a mistake, to discover a misprint. You, the author, will feel humiliated, maybe offended, even angry. Didn't your editor do a good job? Why didn't he notice all this blameworthy nonsense? While thinking this, you know you are being unfair to him. It's impossible to see everything. If you are going over a book again and again, you will not find any more mistakes. The devil knows how to hide them. Be sure your sins will find you out at the moment of the translation. The chances of having an accurate translator pointing out your mistakes is by far the best that can happen to you and not always obvious. Far worse is if you don't know anything about your translator. This is very distressing. You, the author, begin to feel offended and suspicious. You will start thinking things like, my book is not so easy. I am secretly proud of it. Some passages are very complex. How can he understand everything? It's quite an affront. Anyway, if you don't know the language, you have no chance. Your book is delivered, so to speak, hands and feet bound to the person who will translate it. But it will be circulated in the foreign country, carrying my name on its cover. And I will be responsible for all the mistakes it will contain. It's an intolerable idea. Better not be translated at all. Anyway, if the book finds its readers, you will reconcile it with your double, the translator. If not, it was surely his fault. Even worse is the case that the translator who is translating into the language you think you know well will not connect with you. Then there is no limit to your paranoiac thought. He doesn't want to communicate with me. It has got very little money for his work and will try to do the job as quickly as possible. My poor unhappy book, what will happen to you? In fact, that happened to Kurai when it was translated into French. The translator kept quiet the entire time. I couldn't get his name or his email address. And one day I got the book. I was so proud of the very reputable publishing house and the fact that it had a nice cover. Indeed, it looked noble. Then I began to read it. Where did my book go? That wasn't my Kurai. A lot of passages were transformed, simplified, twisted, distorted. I could have cried with pity and rage. I protested, of course, but it didn't help. We are sorry, they said in Paris. The novel has already been published. I had to keep quiet, knowing I'm not very high in the pecking order of the world's well-known authors. With the translation into German and English, I got more chances. I was aware of my inferiority as author, even if I know these languages. The translator always has the upper hand. His comment, you can say that in my language, is enough to destroy every objection. But Martin Thom, an Englishman with a fine sense of history and linguistic correctness, thought over each of my proposals and sometimes accepted them. His translation of Kurai has been awarded the John Florio Prize, which is given by the Society of Authors for the translation of a work of literary merit from Italian to English. With Annette Kopetzky, my German translator, I sat for hours bound over the manuscript to find a solution for her doubts or mine. But in the end, reading Kurai in German was like reading it in Italian. However, the real test for a good translation are the passages which should amuse the readers. Humor is quite difficult to convert into other language because you should convert a cultural field too. There are a lot of variables which make people laugh or just smile. I remember well my reading in Vancouver, Canada. I was waiting for my turn to come onto the stage. Before me, Jonathan Coe was reading with such a professional style, the audience interrupting him very often with laughter. I wondered how he could do it. If I could only get them to smile. I had chosen a funny passage, or what I thought to be funny, but I wasn't sure at all. I was so nervous I could feel my legs shaking. And then it was my turn. I was behind the podium. I remember exactly the red velvet of the theater seats, but I couldn't distinguish the people apart from the faces of the ones sitting in the front row. The silence was perfect. I was getting to the funny passage. I was reading it. Suddenly, some of the people in the audience began not only to smile, they were laughing. And laughter is contagious. Red with emotion and joy, in my red dress, I wanted to get down off the stage and embrace all of them one by one.
That's a very interesting view from the author's perspective, and I would like to turn back now on Fehmida, who also has the perspective of working as a translator as well as an author, and I wonder if Fehmida has had something similar or different when you work simultaneously as a writer as well as a translator. Obviously not from the Italian.
Asif Farooqi is a publisher. He also happens to be my publisher. But you are the only one publisher we have amongst us. In fact, I would like to learn something, and he has published two of my translations. One is Rumi's translation of his ghazals that he published, and the other one is a translation of a novel by Najib Mahfouz, Afrahul Qubba. I did not translate it directly from Arabic because I don't know, I mean, I know just as much Arabic as every Muslim knows because we are all taught to read the Quran when we are young. But of course I don't understand it, and we don't understand it unless we read the translation. But he published this also, Shadiyane. I would like to ask you to tell us something about your experiences as a publisher of translations. He also has published, he must have published others, but I know of, for instance, an Indian author, Uday Prakash, his novel, Pili, how would you translate it into English? Yes, That's what he also published. So Asif, can I ask you to tell us of your experiences as a publisher of translations?
I thought I'm supposed to ask the difficult questions and put you in a tight spot. Thank you for turning the tables on me. I would just like to sort of move beyond this and say that particularly in Pakistan, publishing translations is, of course, it's extremely important, but it's something which a lot of people are not interested in. And although a writer like Najib Mahfouz, or for that matter Jalaluddin Rumi, may be of great interest and relevance, but mainstream publishers are not interested, and the economics of that are appalling. That's one thing. But even before you come to that, the question of how you work with the text, how you make it available, and even the greater difficulty of having works from Pakistani languages available into the international market. That's something where we have done quite badly as a nation. In fact, Intezar Hussain, who's sitting here, is probably one of the only few people whose book, one of his novels, has been translated, and that too because it's been translated by an American, not by anybody from Pakistan. And we all take a lot of pride in our authors, but we have not done as well as we should have. So that's my take on that. Do you want to add something to that?
Yes, I think but since we discussed and probably we agreed, I don't know if all of you would subscribe to that view, that really translations are the need of the hour, and they are really needed in our part of the world especially, to build bridges between countries with whom we are having strife of all kinds. Therefore, what about, sort of creating a market, Asif, for these translations? Would you like to tell us something about what other translations your publishing house, Scheherazade, has published?
Yeah, Fahmida, I think you're turning the tables on me much too frequently. I think I'm going to take a deep breath and stop you. And I would like to throw open this questions to the audience. I think we all agree that translations are important, although they do put authors into miserable conditions. But at times, some of this is inevitable because translations are so important, and we cannot just accept the kind of figures that you have talked about, where only one language is dominant, and that keeps people away from acquiring different registers of knowledge. But I hope that there are questions or comments from the audience, and you can ask questions from anybody, including Fahmida, so that she stops asking questions from me. Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? Durdana or Meher, I'm sure that you might want to.
Over there.
Yeah, please go ahead. Can we keep the questions brief, because so that we finish? Yeah. We completely agree with that. He's saying the translations are very important. No doubt about that.
Asif, I would like to add here really that, this point, the hegemony of English also came up. However, I feel that because there aren't so many people who are so well versed in all the languages, or even in the languages of other countries, some major European languages, translations into English, German or French can be of a great help, so that they then can be translated into Swahili or something, because you see, these are the languages. German, I understand, is very, well, not commonly, but is more accessible to, for instance, the Iranians. So there are lots of Iranian translations of books which were translated into German. They were not originally German, and then they translated into Persian. Similarly for the subcontinent, and God, it's a huge population, huge readership that we have in our subcontinent. We are Anglophiles, and English is the language in which I have read the works of Turkish, the works of Arabic, the works of Indonesian, right? So all these things become accessible to us once they are translated into English. Similarly, French is a language which is more understood in some African countries and some Middle Eastern countries also. So translations into it's not only a matter of hegemony of the languages of the empowered countries and nations, but also a matter of the practical, utility, practical use also. Therefore,
Certainly.
there is a need that these things need to be translated, so that then they can be translated into Urdu, then they can be translated into Sindhi. And we also must pay attention, because you see these parts, like our subcontinent, is multilingual, multicultural, multilingual. Therefore, there is a great need for intra-state translations also. And
Yeah, so
attention
both
should be paid to
nationally and
that.
internationally, there is a greater need of translations. I see a hand at the back, and then I'll turn to Meher. Yeah. You want to get up, and so that the mic can come to you? No mic. It's a bit like translation, so maybe you have to depend on the Italian version of whatever you're going to say.
My question is kind of based off what Pramida and Andy just said about process of translation.
It's not on.
Yeah.
Is this better? Yeah. When they say, when, for example, when you talk about translating poetry, they say that the translator himself must know poetry because he's creating a new poem altogether. So when you talk about translating something that's been written in one language and translated into another, and then translated into a third language based off that initial translation into French or English, I'm wondering, do you think that those kind of translations are necessarily the same as the kind of translations, for example, if there was a direct translation from Chinese to Swahili, and is there a need for those kind of direct translation instead of this sort of more suspicious sort of way that currently smaller languages like translation into Urdu happen?
Yeah. Femida, do you want to respond?
Yes, sure. There's always, it is ideal to have it translated directly from from a language and have it published in your own language. See, the thing is that it's not always possible. Well, mostly it is not possible. Otherwise, you see, the translations that we read, for instance, for us, how would we read Dostoevsky, or for that matter, Paulo Coelho, or Italian, the French masters, unless they were translated into English. And then from that English, they have been translated. So, ideally, somebody should know the language and then translate it into the host language. But, ideals are not always there. So that's the thing. So shall we not go for any translations? I think that we need to. We need to get things translated. Of course, there's always a good translation and a bad translation. I feel that I have not come across a good translation into English of Neruda's work, Pablo Neruda's collected works. I read that and it was so awful that I almost felt like, sort of redoing the whole thing, because I was sure that Neruda must have written something much better than what you find in its English translations published in America. And I don't think they have been published in England, but they may have been. So,
Yeah. Meher, you have a comment?
I have two comments. Okay, I have two quick comments. The first one is that maybe we could expand the question of translation to another medium altogether. For example, we've been discussing translation from one language to another language. But what happens when a story gets translated into film, for example? And also, Pramida just brought up this question of, the translating or retranslating, right? When something comes to us from Russian to English and from English to Urdu. So supposing we look at a story that's been written in Italian, and then a French filmmaker comes along and makes the film in French, but the original Italian story was about a culture that was not Italian but Indian. So there's so many things that are involved in the process of translation and the process of mediation that it undergoes. And I was wondering if anyone in the panel would want to look at all these multiple issues that we deal with in translation.
Whatever you think.
Well, yes, I think certainly it's another issue. It's a different side of translation when we are not speaking of a linguistic translation from one language to the other, but when we are moving it from one medium to a completely different one. And the result is always a not perfect result, whether the medium is the same as a linguistic one or whether the mediums are different. Still, I think we should always remember
Translation
that
from
it's
one
better
medium,
than
yeah.
nothing. In Italian we have a saying which sounds very well in Italian. It's traduttore traditore. It doesn't sound as well in English. It would mean translator traitor. But it's better to have a traitor than to have nothing. It's better to have somebody who passes my words on, maybe imperfectly, maybe aiming at a middle way, than having a barrier between me and you. As for the question of translating everything into
I'll ask
everything
Felicia because
else,
she has, and then I'll
which
finally come to
ideally
you.
would be absolutely perfect if we could have all the Urdu literature in Swahili, in Southern Italian, in some French dialects. It would be wonderful if we could approach all world literature in all languages. I would only like to make the example of our European community, where we've been for many years translating everything into everything. All the documents of the 17 countries of the European Union are constantly translated into the 17 languages, whatever they prepare. And they are getting to a stage where there is an implosion, because it is impossible to translate everything into
Felicia, and then
everything.
you.
You don't have people
Felicia, and then
competent
you,
enough to
because you-
translate across
Yeah.
all languages. And the final decision was to restrict the translation to a few languages. So maybe with English, although we don't like the fact that it is so overpowering and domineering,
Yes.
maybe we are getting though to the presence of something that we have never had before in our global history. Maybe we are having a universal language
but she
with many
wants also to give a
different
short answer.
varieties of accent and connotations.
Yeah. Femida, you have a short
Yeah, I wanted to, because talking about wrong translations, right, or loss in translation, as said by Mayor Afshan, if it can cause a lot of confusion if there is, if a word is misunderstood, as she also pointed out. If you have read, any one of you has read this book, The History of Bible by Karen Armstrong, you must have read in it how Mary became a virgin. Because Karen Armstrong says that the actual text was in fact first written in Greek, right? And there was a word in it which could be used for a virgin or for just a beautiful woman. So when it was translated into Hebrew, they just picked up the virgin. And it just could be it could happen that the entire belief system of a religion is based on the misinterpretation of a word.
Yeah, Sylvia, you have a comment. Yeah.
Yes, a comment to your question. So to translating from one language to this language to another language. So translation is quite like a mirror's play. So as far as you see you, destroyed or distorted is the image you get. So that's really at the end maybe something completely different from the origin. So to be very, very careful with translation, maybe not the opinion of the author who wrote it.
Yeah, last question, because you had your hand up.
I would just like to share a few ideas. First of all, I would like to be grateful to both the authors for my team.
Can it be a question? Because I just have little time.
No, I would just say that basically to speak another language is to live another life. And when Rumi says that speak another language so that the world will be a beautiful world for us. And I think this is what you do when you translate one text into another language. This is what also happened to me when I started translating your text into English. So I totally agree with you that tradura et tradir. But it doesn't mean that you basically do it just for the sake of making a mistake, but you also learn few things that you previously do not know about a particular language. Like this is what happened to me when I started translating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a funny example of something we've said between Tehmina and you on moving from one medium to the other, and also errors in translation. As you know, the Bible was written in Aramaic, and it was translated in the 4th century in Greek and Latin by Saint Gerolamos, 400 after Christ. And he depicts the prophet Moses. He made an error in translation, and instead of saying that Moses had sun rays over his head, he translated horns. So in the European culture of Renaissance, and ever since Saint Gerolamos wrongly translated rays with horns, even Michelangelo, our greatest artist of whom we are so proud, depicted this prophet with these funny horns, and everybody wonders, why on earth did he have horns just like a goat? And there you go, it's a mistake made in 400 after Christ, still carrying on now, and still people wonder, what is this? It was a very, very old mistake.
Yeah, that's getting us into very dangerous ground, because we are now picking up mistakes of translation in old texts. I think this is a time for us to take a deep breath, and I would like to thank the panelists, Sylvia, Lorenza and Femida.
Thank you.
I wish we had more time, but I just want to end on the note that despite all the difficulties, translations are of crucial importance in this world, so that we are not limited or hampered by the hegemony of any particular language, and that we are able to dialogue with each other across languages. Thank you.